Well, here's some food for thought as you contemplate your next summer road trip. Very few books have been written about the Trans-Canada Highway. Most focus on what you can see while traveling on it rather than how the road itself was built. Until now, that is. Craig Baird is the host of Canadian History Ehx, a podcast that looks at the good, the bad, and the just plain weird of Canadian history. He is also the author of Canada's Main Street, the epic story of the Trans-Canada Highway, and he joins me now. Welcome.
Oh, well, thanks for having me.
Congratulations on the book. It is quite the epic story, as the title suggests. Easy question to get us going here, Craig. What inspired you to pen a history of the Trans-Canada Highway?
Well, I've kind of made no secret online and everything that a big inspiration for what I do with Canadian history is Pierre Burton. And in the 1970s, or the early 1970s, he wrote a two-volume set about the CPR, the building of the CPR, called The National Dream and the Last Spike. So I was kind of inspired by that because we have so much that's written about the CPR and the building of the Transcontinental Railway, but not as much about the building of the Trans-Canada Highway. And I felt like the Trans-Canada Highway was just something that was very much overlooked, but it's something that every Canadian has been on likely multiple times. I mean, some people take it to work. It goes through cities and it might be part of a commute, and it's a big part of any kind of summer road trip. And we tend to just not think about it, but everything that went into building it and how long it took and the cost was very much more than what you saw with the CPR, but it's very much in the shadow of the CPR. And I just kind of wanted to give more light to what was really a big moment for Canada and our history.
And as you suggest, we have much more to do with Highway One with the TCH than say the CPR, which is more of a. I mean, while it's still around, it's more of a historical construct now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the CPR is generally now for freight. It's very rare that somebody's going to travel on it. I mean, there is via rail, but I mean, I've lived in Canada my entire life and I've never taken a train trip. I mean, I'd like to eventually. It'd be a great way to see Canada, but it's not like it was before where everybody was taking the train to get everywhere. Now we drive everywhere, and a lot of people are driving on the Trans-Canada Highway. So the Trans-Canada Highway in that regard is much more important for the regular Canadian because it's something that we all use. And it also is used for freight and for transporting goods, just like the CPR. So it has a dual purpose. And the CPR, it's going to always be part of our history, but it's not going to have that same role that it once had.
I get the sense that part of the reason this book is so necessary is because we seem to take the Trans-Canada Highway for granted. Would you agree with that?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, when you drive on the Trans-Canada Highway, you don't really think about the fact that, say, you start in Calgary, you can stay on that road all the way to Nova Scotia and never leave that road. And there's various parts of the Trans-Canada Highway that, we do take for granted, like Back the Moose and Moose Jaw or the Wawa Goose or things like that, or even its cultural impact on us. I mean, everybody knows who Terry Fox is, and Terry Fox ran on the Trans-Canada Highway. Rick Hansen was on the Trans-Canada Highway, and it was a big part of people getting to things like Expo 67 or Expo 86 or the Olympics. And it's just something that it's always there. And I think that's a reason why we don't think of how important it is to our country.
Now, of course, you dig into the history quite extensively here, and I guess it had to be true at some point, but we forget that before the TCH existed, Canadians had to cross into the U.S. to drive from coast to coast.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when you're thinking of over Lake Superior, just the North Road over Lake Superior, and especially through British Columbia. Most people would just go into Detroit and then drive to the United States and then come up into the prairies and then go into Manitoba, continue on through Canada, and then usually go back down to the United States in order to get to Vancouver. And that was because there were roads, like it wasn't until 1946, 47 that we actually had somebody drive coast to coast completely on a road and completely within Canada. Most people who attempted that journey either had to put the car on a boat on Lake Superior, or they had to take it by train for some portions because there was simply no roads. And even the roads that did go across Canada were very poor. They would say that you would have to take, multiple spare tires because you were going to have many flats going across Canada and you'd be hitting boulders and things like that. So, we take for granted how beautiful the Trans-Canada Highway is, how wide open it is and flat and maintained. Because back in before the 1950s, it was not easy to drive across Canada, and you'd have to be an expert with your car because you were going to break down, you were going to deal with hiccups and things like that, and it was just easier to go through the United States.
Now, it seems there wasn't a lot of support for a national highway system at the federal level until at least about 1949, with most of the work being done by the provinces individually. Why the resistance?
Well, I think it was just something that wasn't seen as really a big deal. I think people just accepted that people were driving to the United States. But as we got into the late 1940s and we're in the post-war boom and tourism is starting to become a thing, you start to see that Canada wants to keep more of those tourists in Canada. We want people to be able to drive coast to coast. And I think the Alaska Highway played into it as well. We saw how quickly that was built through pretty much virgin terrain. And we thought that we could probably do the same in Canada. And the federal government, it did take a while for the federal government to be on board with it and try and get it done. But even with that, they only agreed to pay 50% of the highway coast to coast, except for national parks where they would pay 100%. And then the provinces would pay the other 50%. And they were overly optimistic in thinking that the highway would be built by 1957. Saskatchewan was the only province to actually hit that. And a lot of other provinces didn't even get theirs built until 1965 or even into the late 1960s.
Now, as you state in the book, the 1950s were dawning. It was an optimistic, do anything time for Canadians, a decade that would see them undertake three great construction projects: the St. Lawrence Seaway, the Trans Canada Pipeline, and the Trans Canada Highway. I can't help but think of all the nation building statements being made by our current federal government. Do you see any parallels that can be drawn between those times and today?
Not too much, unfortunately, because when we look at the Trans Canada Highway, the federal government told the provinces, we're not going to decide the route, you will decide the route. And I can only imagine how difficult that would be now for each province to agree on the route of the Trans Canada Highway so that it wasn't zigzagging across and, playing into what has to go through Edmonton and Calgary and, playing politics and things like that. So I don't see how easily that would be done now just because of interprovincial rivalries and things like that. Now it is getting better because we're becoming more nationalistic because of the terror threat and things like that. So that might play into it. But we don't have those huge projects like we did in the 1950s. The St. Lawrence Seaway was a massive project, and people forget that Canada paid the majority of that. The United States didn't. So we actually paid for most of the construction of that, and that's something that I don't think would have happened now. And building a highway across the country was something that had to happen to really link the entire country because the car was becoming so prevalent. Everybody was buying cars in the 1940s and 1950s. And I don't see something like that happening now just because politics plays too big of a role. Because back in 1949, every party was in favor of building the Trans Canada Highway. The only thing they disagreed on was how much the federal government would pay.
Now, you just alluded to it, but one of the more fascinating parts of the book is are the battles of where the route would end up. So construction doesn't start until 1949, but no one can agree on a definitive route. What would you say were some of the more contentious battles on where the TCH would end up?
Well, when you're building across Canada, there's some areas where it's just a given that it's going to go, say, like, Quebec City to Montreal. That's obviously where the Trans Canada Highway would go. And in the eastern provinces, there's only, so many roads that would take through a small province. But things really start to get a bit more dicey when you get into the prairies, especially after Manitoba, because at this point, there's multiple routes that the Trans Canada Highway could take. It would split, either go through Saskatoon or Regina into Alberta, and then in Alberta it would either be Edmonton, Calgary, or Lethbridge. So now you have three possible routes, and then getting into Vancouver. Now everybody knew that the Trans-Canada Highway would end in the Lower Mainland and then go on to Vancouver Island, but it was about how it was going to get there. And so Edmonton fought hard to get the Trans-Canada Highway. They had delegations, they had caravans they would take from Edmonton to Jasper to show how viable having the Trans-Canada Highway would be there. And even after Alberta officially said that the Trans-Canada Highway is going to go through Calgary and Banff, Edmonton still fought to still try and get the Trans-Canada Highway. But it was almost a certainty that it would go through the southern parts of the provinces because we really wanted to, connect it with the Americans and have Americans on the highway and being able to travel throughout the country. And then Banff played a major role in that as well because Banff, even back then, was a huge tourist destination. And to have the highway go through there just made a lot of sense. Plus, it also followed the CPR essentially as it went across. But there was one person who said that if the Trans Canada Highway hit every town that wanted it, it would be zigzagging clear across the prairies and Canada, and it would just be this very crooked highway. So it was a very contentious issue, especially in Alberta, because Edmonton's the capital. Edmonton really thought that it would get the Trans-Canada Highway, and in the end, it didn't. Now, the Yellowhead does go through the Edmonton now, and that is considered part of the Trans-Canada Highway system, but it's not the actual Trans-Canada Highway.
Now, as you pointed in the book, a bit of push and pull here in BC as well. Tofino, I didn't know this, wanted the honor of being mile zero of the Trans-Canada Highway, and not Victoria, as ended up being the case.
Yeah, there is, and that was true in other places too on the East Coast. Everybody wanted to be the mile zero because there is a tourist aspect to that, and there is something that you can kind of latch on to draw people to your community. And Tofino felt like it was the just the best bet for that. But it was a foregone conclusion that Victoria would be the end of the Trans Canada Highway because I mean it's the capital. So it essentially starts in the capital of Newfoundland and ends in the capital of British Columbia, and like with Edmonton, a lot of communities fought hard to get the Trans Canada Highway, but it was a losing battle from the very beginning.
And mile zero in Victoria is just off Beacon Hill Park. It's a wonderful spot.
And one really thing I love about the Trans Canada Highway is that on both ends of the Trans Canada Highway you have statues of Terry Fox, and then right in the middle in Thunder Bay you have another statue of Terry Fox, and it shows that impact the cultural impact of the Trans Canada Highway on Canada through people like Terry Fox.
Well, that brings me to the last chapter of the book, in which you try to find some greater meaning of the Trans-Canada Highway. We've talked about Terry Fox and Rick Hansen and how their journeys are so intimately tied to the route. But also, how has it become such a unifying force for all Canadians, would you say?
Well, I think because it allowed us to travel coast to coast and never leave our country. And, driving from BC to Nova Scotia, you see so much different landscapes and different people and different cultures. And I think not enough people take that journey. Now, obviously, it is a long journey. We're a very big country, but I think everybody should take a journey on the Trans Canada Highway at least once. And you don't have to go across the country, but cover several provinces and just see how amazing this country is. And like I said, people just seem to take it for granted that the Trans Canada Highway exists. I mean, if you live in Calgary and you want to go to Peters Drive-In, you just hop onto 16th Avenue and drive to Peters Drive-In. But 16th Avenue is part of the Trans Canada Highway, and people just don't even think about that. And even for me this year with driving across Canada, it's just such an easy way to do it. You can fly across Canada and do it quickly, or you can drive across Canada and see the historical sites and see those roadside attractions and stop in at those local diners and really explore Canada. And you have this beautiful highway that's existed for over half a century now that allows you to do this so easily.
And as you say in the book, there's a comfort that we can take just in the very fact that the Trans-Canada Highway even exists.
Absolutely. I used to live in a community called Gull Lake, Saskatchewan, and from my front yard, I would be able to look and see the Trans-Canada Highway. And there is an odd, comfort to it at night when you see those lights on the highway, and it tells you that everything is all right. Everything is moving. The civilization is going strong. People are on the highway, and that's kind of what I always thought of with the Trans-Canada Highway was it was something that was very comforting because it does connect every province across the country and allows us to really kind of learn more about people in other provinces, whether it's Quebec or Newfoundland or British Columbia or Manitoba.
What do you hope people get out of the book?
Well, I hope people just see the importance of the Trans-Canada Highway in terms of Canadian history, that it is on par with the CPR. Now, the CPR obviously had a massive impact on Canada and led to the settlement of the Canadian West, but the Trans-Canada Highway cost more. It took far longer to build. It had just as many difficult areas to build through, like the Canadian Shield and, all the bridges and everything through British Columbia and things like that. And it may not have the cachet that the CPR has in our history, but it definitely deserves that, because it was such an important part of our history, and it helped do so much for Canadians to explore their country. And kind of, it's the sequel to the CPR, and it's something that I think people need to celebrate more.
The name of the book is Canada's Main Street, The Epic Story of the Trans-Canada Highway. It is published by Sutherland House. My thanks to author Craig Baird.
Thank you.